Coming up next is the Enterprise Services panel to be moderated by Lee Song, Managing Director, Silicon Valley Bank Asia Link. The panelists will discuss what the technology can do to innovate and better serve the work from anywhere trend during and post the pandemic. Please submit your questions in either Baidu or YouTube live stream chat box. So welcome the panel.
Well, thank you, Coco. One evening about 2 months ago, when I was just about to sit down for dinner, an email alert showed up on my phone. After quickly reading through it, I was like this. You probably wonder, what's in that email? Well, my friend Ann at Berkeley just asked me if I'd be okay to moderate this panel. Okay? It's more than okay. I love volunteering in any occasion for my beloved Berkeley. So hello, everyone. My name is Lee Song. I'm a managing director at SVB's Asia Link practice, where I have been a technology banker for 20 years. I'm so thrilled that you can join us today, and welcome. So in today's session, we're going to spend probably 25 minutes or so in a moderated discussion where our speakers will tell their take on how the pandemic and the remote work trend impact the enterprise service sector, future tech trends, and also the US-China business model. And then we'll have a 20 minutes or so Q&A answering the questions submitted by the audience. Toward the end, I'm going to share with you a personal story of my life and how my family's diet has been impacted by the pandemic. So stick around till the end, it'll be fun. Let's introduce our speakers today. Dialing in from Beijing, we have Lu Guo. Lu is a VC in the SIG Asia in China. And from Shanghai, we have Junyuan Qi. Junyuan is the founder of Team Vision, a company he founded while still in college. Here in the Bay Area, we have Xintong Zhang. Xintong is a product director at Salesforce. And also from the Bay Area, we have Professor Henry Chesbrough from Berkeley. So Lu, Junyuan, Xintong, and Professor, welcome. Lu, let me start with you. As a VC and tech investor, what do you think the tech sector can respond and better serve the work from anywhere reality nowadays?
Okay, thanks for the question. It's good. It's an honor to be here. First, I want to say the COVID-19 things, it does put on lots of damage and a negative impact on our business. I really wish everybody stay safe and our business stay sound. But at the same time, we do see this COVID-19 being a catalyst. The so-called work from anywhere or engagement from anywhere has been one of the major themes we have been working on. I tend to think about this in two angles. The first angle is how do I interact? How do I work with my internal team? So even before the COVID-19, there were a bunch of the gadgets and tools, right? You can easily pull out a couple of apps on your mobile phone, which supports free video conferencing. But now we realize what we need is we need an enterprise grade service, which is highly reliable, which can consolidate my data from different angles, which can support tens or even hundreds of people talking at the same time. So moving from gadgets into an enterprise service grade collaboration tools, that's something highly demanded in the market. And that's something we have been working on as well. Another angle we think about this is we also have to engage with the external people, like our customers, our suppliers, people we potentially want to recruit. What it takes there is more than just technology and the products. It also takes some cultural shift. It takes our change on the mentality. I have to learn how to engage my external partners, how to build up the chemistry, how to build up the rapport, and also precisely identify the pitfalls, the issues through video conferencing through internet interactions instead of the in-person meeting. Well, it's been a few months. I think so far the progress has been pretty good. We did notice that this kind of culture shift has been happening a lot. It's been changing lots of the day-to-day business behavior.
Well, the human element part of the changes you brought up is a key thing. We're going to come back and revisit that loop. So let me ask Junyuan, as a tech founder, what do you think the entrepreneurs and founders can do to seize this work from anywhere opportunity nowadays?
Thanks. I hope everyone is doing great. In this question, first to bring up, I firmly believe in the future of work from anywhere, as now we are spending too much time and too many resources on transportation. The question should be how to accelerate this convention. To make such mass convention, need we put thoughts into things that are happening every day in people's daily work instead of like bring up cool products for geeks. For example, we are now easily holding this kind of conversation-based meeting online, but we cannot hold a workshop online because we cannot very easily draw on the same whiteboard together, and how to make things like this happen matters. And in conclusion, I think we are in the path to create a digital world for everyone. So the most important thing is we make this new world people can find familiar, and but everything is like better in an intuitive way. Thanks.
That's certainly a good angle. When we bring a lot of people online, that puts so much strain on the supporting software part. So let's ask someone from the software company, Xintong. Certainly you're with Salesforce, and then as you know, the SaaS sector is certainly kind of a hot field now, certainly impacted by the pandemic in a big way. Can you tell us how the pandemic has impacted the SaaS sector so far?
Absolutely, great question. Hello everyone, I'm Xintong, Director of Product Management from Salesforce. It's really my pleasure to be here, share my personal thoughts and opinion with you. Just one quick disclaimer that I don't represent Salesforce. And back to our question in terms of the impact COVID-19 has on the SaaS industry. I guess everyone, just by browsing your browsing news lately, you might have been seeing the booming of SaaS from cases like Snowflake IPO, Zoom IPO early of the year, and the surge of Salesforce revenue throughout Q2. So it seems that the SaaS industry are all booming and happy. And today I just want to share with you that not all the SaaS businesses are affected equally. Yes, there are happy cases, but also there are challenges that we see from this pandemic. For example, many companies out there are cutting their IT budget. Gartner, in fact, predicts that there is a 5% contraction of worldwide IT spending. So that basically means that the spending on the software are less than before. The key factor to determine whether a SaaS business is growing or is affected negatively is really how mission critical the problem that SaaS company is trying to solve is. We can put ourselves in a situation that of a CIO of a company or of a customer. What they're doing right now is they're really scrutinizing all the SaaS or software offerings that they have and try to reduce costs by just terminate the contract for non-essential softwares. So the first point that I want you to take away with is build truly mission critical product that will give you the resilience of your company. And secondly, going back, I just want to echo what Junyuan said earlier regarding the fact that COVID-19 is truly an opportunity for the SaaS industry. And we've all seen that human-to-human interactions has been blocked or coming with inconvenience. So all of these interactions that are currently not being digitalized are the opportunity for this industry.
Well, you brought up a certain key point, meaning COVID-19 is an opportunity. I want to say, anytime we have a kind of a natural thing where huge pandemic like this, it creates winners and losers. We're going to come back to you, ask you to predict the future a little bit in a later question session. Just stay there on that thought, Xintong. And you also mentioned the kind of global perspective. I want to bring in our Professor Chesbrough. Professor, as a Berkeley professor, well-known scholar around the world, you guys primarily work with ideas, big ideas. And the biggest, well, I think one of the biggest idea of our lifetime is probably the US-China relation. So based on your observation, how do you compare the US business model to those of the Chinese?
Well, Lee, thank you very much for including me. I want to give shout out to my former student, Beishuan, who is with us today in Shanghai. And she suffered through my class last spring before the pandemic. And indeed, I think she was the one who initially invited me to be with you. To speak to your question directly, many companies in the US have gone through a period where they were really excited about China. It was the next big growth market. It was a huge, big opportunity. And many, not all, but many were then disappointed with their business performance in China. Not all. Apple has done well. Tesla looks like it's doing great. Now that Xintong is doing it, I know Salesforce is going to be awesome as well. But many companies were very disappointed. And I think there's a lesson for us in their disappointment, because I think one of the root causes is not that China didn't become a very large, rapidly growing market. It did. But the US companies trying to penetrate it were taking with them the business models they brought from the US. And what is needed in China, it's a very competitive market as well as a very, very big market, and things happen fast. And so many American companies, in my judgment, made the error of not delegating enough authority to the local China managers to adapt the products, fix the problems, change even the pricing and the business models and even the branding, if need be be successful in that market. And so I think that's one of the big problems that American companies have had. It's not been the technologies, it's been their inability to adapt to the business models. And when you trace that back, it's due to an inability or an unwillingness to delegate enough authority and trust the leaders you have in China to do the right thing for your company.
Well, thank you, Professor. You cannot believe how many additional questions I thought of just based on what you told us just now. So stick around, there'll be more questions coming your way momentarily.
Well, and Lee, I have one example that might even interest you in Silicon Valley Bank. So when we come back, we'll talk about it.
Oh, let's do that. I appreciate that, yeah. So before I ask the next round of questions, I want to just shout out to the audience. Feel free to send in your questions in the chat box. And then we're going to gather that and then ask the audience, ask the speakers on that. So feel free to send in the questions. So the next question is coming back to Xintong. You're a veteran software kind of professional. You've been in the field for a long time and you work for a large company. You must have seen kind of big impact caused by kind of big changes like this pandemic. What lessons have we learned in the past sudden changes like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we handle changes, maybe I'll take a step back. Let's use an analogy of ourselves. Back in March, when the shield in place or the lockdown was happening in Bay Area, everyone were told to work from home. So my first intuition was, okay, this is probably going to be a few weeks working from home. I can power through it by squatting in my dining table. So I have a temporary solution for working from home, which is squatting at the dining table. And soon I realized that this is becoming a long-term lifestyle change. So I cannot survive just by a dining table. So what happened is I started buying office equipment, gym equipment at home, and also I start planning out on strategies around how to manage my time so that I can both effectively work at home and take care of myself. That same transformation is also happening to the businesses. So there are two categories of businesses these days. Some of them are treating this, they're reacting to the change as if it's temporary, so that they would put in Band-Aids or stop the bleeding with hope that someday their business will get back to normal. And the second category of businesses are that they know that there is no going back to normal. We are living in the future. The future looks a lot like where we are today. So what they do is they are really starting their planning for the long term. How do they deal with this change as a strategic change? So that to them, digitization is not a short-term fix for this problem. It's really where they want to go in long term. And my observation has been these companies that are treating this change as a long-term strategy change are doing better.
Well, that's very helpful. I particularly like your home gym expansion example because that relates to many people. That's exactly what I did for my home. We're done with this session. I'd love to compare our pictures of your gym and my home gym after this. And so back to Junyuan, Xintong mentioned about changes in the past. As someone who founded the company, keep a very close eye of future trend, what do you think are the changes in the next 5-10 year period of time?
Thank you for the question. I think the most important change in the workplaces will be the change of people. We will have a younger generation, what I call app generation. They grown up with mobile apps for like order takeaways, etc. Their intention of solving a problem is to find whether there's an app and digital tool for that. So I think the most important trend here in workplace is that we will see more softwares with consumer experiences. Like, for example, they will expect software to be mobile first. And I think they want to log something into your CRM instead of going back to their desktop. And they will expect softwares that are friendly for them to use individually or among small groups. Because waiting for someone to set up the system or approve access to an application will lose their patience. And also, I think they will expect videos as the main form of information. You can't expect them to read menus for anything, but I think instead they should be video tutorials. So things like this will happen a lot. Thanks.
Oh, I think that the video part of it is spot on. And nowadays, a lot of, like you said, a lot of the menus are actually just videos. You can email all that to your client, and then it's so visual, so effective. So kudos to you for pointing that out. And so back to Professor Chesbrough. You and I certainly are people who have been watching China for a long, long time, and then we have our views and consensus. You and I kind of agree that sometimes US companies, when they go to China, they couldn't compete with China. And I mean, why? What do you think? Can we drill down to that subject a little bit more?
Absolutely. And here's where I can bring in some information from the financial services sector that might even be relevant to Silicon Valley Bank. Many of the people in this group are going to be familiar with Ant Financial, although many people in the United States don't actually know much about them. but they're a very important company, and I think we're all going to know a lot more about them in the future. But one of the things that they did that I think is a nice illustration of why it's been hard for the US companies, and indeed why it might be hard for Silicon Valley Bank, at least in certain areas. So many people know that in the last 12 months, there's been a real problem with pork production in China. They had this terrible virus that really killed off a lot of the pigs on the farms in China, especially small and medium-sized farmers were really, really heavily hit. And so Ant Financial thought we really could offer a product, essentially crop insurance for pigs, for the farmers. So we could insure farmers against the risk of loss of their herd of pigs. But of course, how do you actually execute such an offer? And this is where Ant, I think, drew on other parts of Alibaba, because with visual recognition and artificial intelligence, they literally created a way that the farmer could take a picture of each pig. And with the facial recognition software, you could literally set up an inventory of the herd of pigs for that farmer on that farm. And then you can insure them. So if a pig dies, the farmer can't just say it was another pig. It's got to be the one that matches the records that they have. So it was an enabling technology in a very high-tech way that allowed farms to be protected in financial services from something that's been a serious problem for the last 12 months. But if you're Silicon Valley Bank, how on earth do you compete with that? You don't have the access to the farms. You may not have access to the visual recognition and artificial intelligence technologies and all the rest. The money is the least of it. It's all these other pieces that are being put together in a very creative way to solve what has been a really big problem in Chinese agriculture over the last year. He is speechless. Let the record show he is speechless.
That is a fantastic example you brought up. This is the first time I've heard of facial recognition technology that's being used on pigs.
Same here. I was not aware of it either.
I'm completely speechless. But back to your kind of soft question. At Silicon Valley Bank, we certainly don't finance any pig-related stuff. We do.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet, yeah. But what we excel is the technology that behind that technology, the facial recognition, the software, the hardware, all those things. That's one of the key areas we finance. And certainly our life science sector or practice is world-class as well. For example, our clients are just working on Alzheimer's disease keyword, addiction keyword, all those things. One of the kind of COVID vaccine developers is also our client. So that's where we excel. We want to leverage in this technology field. But that pig's facial recognition example is just a world-class, it's a killer one. Kudos to you, Professor.
Well, and I have one that's a positive story for Silicon Valley Bank. As you were saying, Silicon Valley Bank has deep connections in the tech sector and has had them for a long time now. They realized that this was worth banking long before commercial banks were willing to do so. And it really got them in a preferred position with many of the technology leaders. And through the relationships that were developed, it actually got Silicon Valley Bank into Napa and Sonoma County wine production. Not because they knew a lot about wine, but because the founders of these companies, when they retired, they went to open up wineries and they already had these strong relations with Silicon Valley Bank. And Silicon Valley Bank said, you know what, we believe in you, we're going to go with you. And so it did get Silicon Valley Bank into that part of agriculture.
Well, thank you for that nice plug from my employer. I'll definitely send you a bottle of wine after this session.
Well, we both know Gerard Brady, and he told me a lot about this and even took me on a tour of some of the investments that Silicon Valley Bank had up in Sonoma and Napa. So I have firsthand knowledge of some of this.
I appreciate that.
But I'm always willing to do more research.
Yeah, will do. I'm going to bring the conversation back to Berkeley China Summit. So back to Lou. Hey, Lou, I want to ask you, in addition to Ant Financial, Silicon Valley Bank, the PIC, facial recognition, all that, The other two sectors our audience sent a lot of interest in are the B2B and then the SaaS sector. They wanted to know, based on your observation, what are the similarities and differences between these two sectors between the US and China? What's your take on that?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Well, apparently the software business, well, SaaS, IT, everything, it started accelerating the development in the past 5 years. This is one of the major markets my fund made investment in, and I happen to be leading this practice. So for that, I get a chance to talk to lots of entrepreneurs and experts in this domain. I think as a general rule, most people would agree that US is leading China on this phase, maybe for 5, 10, or even longer period of time. But we believe China is trying to catch up very quickly. China will be there. What US experienced, what it took US 10, 15 years to develop, it might take a slightly shorter time to get there in China. So we often run into questions. Well, we tend to take the successful case in US as a benchmark for the future success case in China. As we mentioned, Snowflake is filing IPO, which is a very good company. So people here started talking about, hey, where is the Snowflake in China for the next few years? So that kind of copying the new idea, copying the proven technology to China has been one of the major thinking framework people have been taking on. Well, if you have been in the technology long enough, you would know that this phenomena is nothing new. 10, 15 years ago, people were trying to copy the successful internet consumer internet, consumer mobile internet apps to China. And then very quickly, China got enough innovation power, and you see China and the US are like running on par and sometimes leading the innovation on the consumer internet into two different paths. I do believe that kind of trend will happen in the software business, in the B2B business as well. We are gonna see this trend even more significant in the next 5, 10 years.
That's great. I mean, along that subject, I wanted to bring in Xintong. So Xintong, what do you think this whole remote work, kind of a new normal, what's their impact on the businesses and also on the professionals?
Yeah, for sure. I think we talked about the impact on businesses earlier in terms of the things are rapidly changing. So the businesses should really be leaning into these changes, acknowledge the changes, and adapt to it. So if there is like one advice that I could give to a business, although I have never found my business, so this could totally be my personal opinion, is stay agile. Just like development, we plan out for the very near future and rapidly adapt our plan based on the market, based on the customer needs. So that's also that also applies to businesses, just given how rapid things has been changing for this year. And in terms of the professionals, I do have one quick note or advice, which is stay proactive. I know it applies to any scenario to anybody, but really in this working from home mode, it's more relevant because many hallway conversations, bumping into people or ad hoc learning things are no longer happening. You cannot run into someone in the elevator and learn something that is not immediately in your area. So proactively reaching out to people, learn things outside of your own area is gonna be important for the growth for any individuals.
Well, that's a great point. It's certainly very humble of you to say that you've never founded a business, et cetera, but you work at a large company, and that speaks of your credentials and credibility a lot. But we do have a person who founded a company at a very young age. So Junyuan, let me ask you, what do you think the new way of work and collaboration mean to founders and entrepreneurs like you going forward?
Thanks for the question. I think the most important thing to recognize is there's a trend of like a lot of new people coming from the consumer areas. They usually like work in social platforms. They used to work in e-commerce platforms. They are coming into this area of like collaboration or like business and the productivity area. And they have very good understanding of how to satisfy end users. And they have very natural understanding of the network effects of growth. And things like this will help them to bring out solutions that we usually couldn't work out. And so learn these things and be partners with these guys. And I think this will be the huge change and what we can embrace in the years to come. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. And one kind of final question from me to Lou is that if you can quickly answer the same question, what do the kind of the changes in work and collaboration mean for the investors like you guys?
Okay. So I think there's lots of points I can talk about, but maybe I'll just pick one. As I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 does put on lots of culture shift. One major impact we are going to see is the sales efficiency, sales processes is going to be changed a lot. And I think the meaningfulness behind this is not only saving some sales costs, but it really makes some of these SaaS-based, especially the medium small business oriented SaaS business, profitable at the unit economy level. So there are certain sides of the sales which is very hard to handle. It does require the on-site meeting, in-person deployment, etc. But the check size is not big enough to cover the cost. This is one of the major reasons why the SME-based SaaS business had lots of hard time in the past 10 years. But this COVID-19 is changing that kind of dynamics. It's changing the sales efficiency. That means this could be a very strong driver for that category of the SaaS business, which struggled in the past 10 years, but really take off in the next decade.
That's great. We kind of concluded our moderated session and we covered a lot of ground. So in the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to answer questions submitted by the audience. There's tons of questions coming in. So one quick note to the audience. You guys are doing great. There's tons of questions, so stick around, don't click away because your questions might be answered. The first question is, I'll throw it out, anyone can answer. What are the new tools and processes that companies need to succeed in the post-pandemic world? Who wants to take that?
Let me have this question.
Yeah.
I think what companies should do is to take tools that can accelerate the transition of information. This is losing of context in the digital world is what we are experiencing. We have like too many chats and too many conversations in emails, and we are losing the real context. So if we can adopt tools that help our employees, help our partners to really understand where the goal is and to set up a navigation system for the company's information systems, I think that's the most important things.
That's helpful. So the second question is for our professor. Professor, you brought up facial recognition and AI. These frontier tech are being treated differently by the Chinese and US government due to privacy and ethics concerns. What are your thoughts on regulation on technology development?
It's a very important question, and one that's even in real time. We're hearing Washington, D.C. Banning TikTok and WeChat. And I think the ostensible reasons are these issues. So this is a real-time question. I would also bring in a third party into the discussion. There's China, there's US, and I would also bring in the EU. And the reason I would bring in the EU is that although they don't have companies that are as strong as either China or the US, their market is actually the largest of the three. And if you think back to privacy and the GDPR that was implemented a couple of years ago now, that originated in Europe. And then companies in the US and China said, you know, it's actually more efficient just to adopt that process and agree to it. And then we can have a global standard for privacy rather than having to implement different versions for different markets. I think that might be a model for where we're going, that China and the US are in opposition to each other because of different values, different properties of data, different capabilities of government to regulate and so on. But there's also a third party, Europe, that cares very much about this. And because they don't have a strong technology player in the fight, they're going to be thinking more about the needs of their consumers because they don't have a strong producer to protect. And so it could be the case that Europe could deliver the solution for both China and the US for the same kinds of reasons. It's better and more efficient to sell to everybody than to have to create different versions for different regions.
Let me just follow up on that. Europe is a heavily regulated region to do business. Wouldn't their regulation just put more burden on business or on new technology over there?
Well, there's no question that if you look at the software industry in China and you look at it in the US and you look at it in Europe, you know, China and the US are both incredibly dynamic and Europe is much less so. And so it has some of those negative effects that you mentioned, but there's a positive effect that comes from this as well, which is they aren't there to advocate for a really large domestic company, the way the US might defend Microsoft or might defend Facebook or Google, or the Chinese might defend Alibaba or Tencent. Europe doesn't have anybody like that to defend. So how are they going to make their policy? They're going to try to think about what's in the best interest of their consumers. And that's, I think, what happened in the privacy domain. Where Europe really, in the regulation area, they really did take the lead on privacy.
That makes sense. So the next question is for Xintong. Xintong, you brought up reaching out to people. The world won't be the same post-pandemic. How will company and professionals connect to opportunities differently in the work from anywhere world?
That's a great question. I think so. That is still to be developed. There are a lot of opportunities that we see in this space, such as before the businesses can reach out to consumers or to their team by running virtual events and actually running physical events in Moscone Center in San Francisco or in some stadium in somewhere in the world. And those kind of human-to-human interactions no longer exist. So there are definitely gaps to be filled in terms of how the businesses reach out to people. And as a professional that are looking for career growth, I think the only thing that we could do as the technology are developing to fill in this gap is to really initiate the conversations with people that either you know or you don't know, and start navigating around the organization, either within the organization or outside of the organization.
Good point, yeah. So the next question is, do you think COVID will accelerate trends like nationalism and reshoring of trade, as COVID exposed risk of extended supply chain, companies are shifting toward resilience and domestic circulation. Who wants to take that? Oh, Professor, please.
So I'll at least start this conversation. I do think that COVID did expose supply chains that were dependent entirely on a single country. And so when there were interruptions, it limited their ability to adapt quickly. Xintong was talking about agility a few moments ago and the importance of that. So one can think of this as exposing the reality that if you optimize and make it very, very efficient and scale it massively, you do lose some agility. And so we don't have to retreat to an isolationist world. I like very much your term resilient, and I would maybe have a little spice of agility thrown in there so that as things shift and change in ways that are not always able to be foreseen, organizations are then more agile and more resilient, and they haven't completely withdrawn inside their own walls, but neither are they overcommitted and overextended to a single source, a single supplier who would may be really large and massive and efficient, but may not be very flexible or adaptive.
That's a good point. The next question is for Lu. So Lu, can you name one hot sector in China and one not so hot sector in China?
Oh, okay. I think the first part is much easier than the second part. I can easily give a couple. Well, given this COVID-19, we all know everything is moving faster towards cloud. Digitization has been an even accelerated trend. Along this trend, security and compliance is becoming a higher demand because there are more data, more interaction on the internet. We need a better compliance structure in shape and a better security infrastructure there. So we do see most of the companies in this domain actually benefited from this pandemic. What's not so hot here, I want to say lots of the traditional business, which involves lots of the labor work, in-person interaction, got hit very heavily, especially if those businesses were running on a thin margin. I'll give you one example, logistics service. Well, we were just talking about supply chain, right? We do manage a few portfolio companies which works on this supply chain technology. We noticed that this traditional logistics service companies, they were running on the thin margin. They were hit like really heavily during the pandemic. In the first 3 months of this year. Another example I can give you, I just went to this industrial expo in Shanghai a few days ago. The key difference we noticed that the expo this year, the difference between this year and last year, there are just so much less smaller company in the expo this year because they didn't have enough buffer on the cash balance. They couldn't manage the payment terms well, and they were just of the business. I think those, if you didn't take on the digitization enough, if you were not able to managing your financial in an efficient way, then it's a very not hot business in the market.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, here in the Bay Area, one sector I can tell you suffer a lot is the bike sharing business or the scooter sharing business. Yeah. They almost just disappeared since the COVID pandemic hit. I don't know about the situation in China, but I would imagine that's probably the same thing. How can you share those things when there's germs or virus on them? So, I mean, yeah. Another thing I want to say.
That's true. I think an easier example, which I didn't raise, but I think everybody would agree that travel, especially leisure travel industry, that was a major hit. I don't think it's coming back yet. And movie you know, there are just so many fewer people going to theater now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the next question is, it's an open question to everyone, I guess. How will the pandemic change where companies choose to hire and where people choose to live? Who wants to take that?
I can take the second half of it. Basically, how does it change where people choose to live? I think living in Bay Area, where it is one of the most expensive, it has one of the most expensive housing within the United States. I have many friends that are looking to move somewhere else. I think there are some surveys recently, but I don't remember the number. There are many people already moving out to Texas, to other areas inside of the United States, and even outside of the country. So that is happening. But there are, the trickiness is the salary adjustment because of the movement, and also the regulations around where are you allowed to work from for this company. So yeah, I think the motivation is there. And if we give it some time, this might happen.
Well, that's a great point. I think from my perspective, where the company choose to hire, I can probably add on to that. In my opinion, I think this work from home new normal will significantly expand where company can hire. They don't have to hire people within their local geographic area. They can hire people from other area because it's all work from home nowadays. So that's, I think, a great opportunity for company, for people. You will see a lot of people movement nowadays, which is true, like you said earlier. Yeah.
I guess I can make a couple of further comments regarding that point. I think the idea of employment will go through some further change, some deeper change, especially in China in the next 5-10 years. More and more people will be moving from the traditional tight employment relationship into something more like a freelancer in the past, which means they belong to, their contribution is more like a project-based instead of being a long-term employment. But there will be a profound difference between the newer model of the freelancer versus the older model of the freelancer. In the past, the freelancer can only take on projects which are clearly defined, the boundary is clearly defined, which can be more handled in a more independently way. But now we are seeing this collaboration technology, driving forward very fast. We are going to see more and more people in a freelancer mode can contribute in those highly collaborative projects, which functions more like a typical employee, but their relationship to this employer is more project-based other than a long-term relationship.
That's a great point. You brought up the freelancers. I want to just add one point to that, because here in California, the state regulation is playing a big impact on the freelance business, because there's a big battle going on between Uber and Lyft and the state. There's laws kind of impacting that. It's a big issue here in California. So kudos for bringing that up. Another question from the audience is this: quickly, can you name one sector, either B2B or B2C, that's supposed to accelerate due to COVID, but actually did not? Quickly, just who can take that? And just one sector, that's it. Well, if there's no answer to that question, that's the question of the day. It got all 4 of our speakers here. So, Professor, any answer to that? Do you know? If no, we'll move on to the next one.
I don't have something good to offer there. I can observe that in past pandemics, we go through an overshoot where we ramp up production of ventilators, we ramp up production of vaccines, et cetera. And we don't have enough, we have to go harder, harder, harder. And then at some point, we saturate. And then sadly, a year later, these things are unutilized and there's usually a big write-off. So it's not happening now, and I wouldn't want any of the vaccine companies to slow down at all. But I think we can expect that there will be an overshoot.
That's a good point. So the last question in the Q&A session is from me to all the speakers. So just feel free to answer in short one-sentence answers. Let's say this year's Berkeley China Summit is such a success, and then we miraculously got rid of the pandemic. So tomorrow, the world is back to normal, was back to normal. What will be the first thing you plan to do if that happened? Xintong, start from you.
I will eat a Hong Kong style fish at the restaurant.
Very good. What about you, Junyuan?
I'm looking forward to surf in Hawaii.
Very good. What about you, Lou?
Well, I don't think my day-to-day routine and my day-to-day life has been changed that much. Likely, it's not going to be lots of change to me either once the pandemic ends.
Professor, what about you?
I will be going to Rome, Italy.
Oh, no.
I have an appointment there at a university in Rome called Lewis, and I was expecting to get there a couple of times in 2020, and I haven't been able to, so I'm eager to get back.
That is fantastic. My thing to do is I can't wait to send my son back to school when that happens.
For that part, I already did.
Okay, good. So I cannot wait. But jokes aside, and all I can say, what a fantastic and informative session we have there. Hats off to the speakers and also hats off to the audience. The questions you sent in are just spot on. You guys are doing great, awesome. Before I return the mic back to our MC, let me share with you a personal story of my family. When the whole stay-at-home order started back in March here in the Bay Area, my family of 3 decided that because we're not going to go out and do a lot of exercise, we need to eat very healthy every day. As it turned out, within a week, we basically gave up all other healthy diet and focused exclusively on seafood diet. What do I mean by that? When we walk around the house, whatever food we see, we eat them. So with that bad joke, I'm gonna give the mic back to the MC Coco. Coco. Coco, the mic is back to you.
Can you hear me? Great. So thank you all for the wonderful presentation. And I'm also very curious about the facial recognition technology for the pigs as well. We'll find out. So next is the networking session with this panel. For all the audience interested in further conversation with this panel, please sign up and join the networking session. Thank you all.